Hey everyone, Noah Zerby here. This is one of a series of short videos looking at the key institutional actors in American foreign policy. This video looks at the role of the president and focuses in particular on the question of presidential leadership styles. There's surprisingly a rich literature on the topic of leadership styles, much of which focuses on the individual's psychological characteristics, behavioral patterns, and cognitive approaches employed by specific presidents. Indeed, much of this work falls into the field of political psychology. And so in this video, we're going to look briefly at a few of the numerous efforts to develop models to understand different styles of presidential leadership in the context of foreign policy decision making. You should remember that when we're thinking about global politics, we often specify that there are three levels of analysis: the international or the system level, the domestic or state level, and the individual level. When we're looking at presidential leadership styles, we're very squarely on the individual level. This is important because much of the traditional theorizing in international relations and foreign policy is deeply rooted at the systemic level. Realist international relations theory, for example, posits that state behavior is largely driven by the structure of the international system, suggesting that individuals or individual leaders have little room to maneuver. For most realists, it makes little difference who leads a country. Whether the United Kingdom is led by Neville Chamberlain or Winston Churchill, it still faced an international context where Britain was threatened by Nazi expansion. Each leader would have faced a similarly hostile international environment and would have been compelled to behave in similar ways. But political psychology pushes back against that assertion and maintains that the individual outlooks, behavioral characteristics, cognitive orientations, psychologies, and identities of leaders affect how they view the world and thus how they approach the decisions they make. And from this perspective, it makes a great deal of difference who the decision maker is. Under this approach, Churchill's orientation was much more assertive, more willing to directly confront a hostile Germany than Chamberlain was, and so the characteristics of the individual leader mattered. So how exactly are we to understand the different political psychologies and leadership styles of individuals? There are a number of different approaches, but for our purposes, we're just going to consider a couple. At the most basic level, presidents structure their relations with their political advisors in different ways, often reflecting their individual preferences and personalities. In the formalistic model, the president sits at the top of a strict chain of command. Advisors are expected to adhere to narrowly defined roles and channel their input through the chain of command, with key top-level advisors like the Chief of Staff or the Secretary of State or the National Security Advisor playing a gatekeeping role, filtering what information reaches the president. President Nixon relied on this kind of structure, with Henry Kissinger often serving as gatekeeper. George W. Bush employed a similar style. In the competitive model, the president encourages active discussion and debate, and sometimes even competition between their advisors. Franklin Roosevelt was fond of this model, believing that active debate and unfettered and even often chaotic discussions among competing viewpoints would yield the best decisions. Eisenhower adopted a similar approach, stating once that, quote, "I know of one way in which you can be sure you've done your best to make a wise decision. That's to get all of the people who have partial and definable responsibility in their particular field, whatever it may be. Get them with their different viewpoints in front of you and listen to them debate." The third model is the collegial model. This encourages working back and forth, reaching a consensus in decision-making, and reconciling differences between advisors. President Clinton famously employed this approach, often encouraging debates that would run long into the night. President Obama employed this style as well, and advisors of all ranks were encouraged to voice their opinions candidly with the president. President Obama frequently employed a deliberative strategy known as multiple advocacy, gathering everyone's views and then frequently leaving a meeting without making a decision. Only after considering all of the arguments would he later make his final decision and expect backing from the foreign policy bureaucracy. Next, let's look at some of the work of scholars like Margaret Herrmann and Thomas Preston. Their work explains how a president's leadership style might affect the work of their advisors. In their classic article, President's Advisors in Foreign Policy, Herrmann and Preston classify presidential orientations along two axes. The first axis is the president's interest and involvement in the foreign policy process itself. Presidents may be more focused on the specifics and the substance of individual decisions, that is, they may be more problem-focused, or they may be more focused on the broader political processes that guide all decisions rather than on the specifics of any one individual decision. The second axis evaluates a president's reliance on formal or informal mechanisms of control and decision-making. Presidents may prefer to be more formal and hierarchical in their advisory structures, or they may prefer less formal and less hierarchically organized structures. This echoes the structural models we just considered. Based on these dichotomies, Herrmann and Preston developed 4 broad presidential orientations. The first are presidents who prefer to function as chief executive officers. These presidents tend to favor formal authority and patterns relying on well-established processes and hierarchical organizations. They also tend to focus on broad political processes rather than on the substance of any individual decision. Such presidents usually empower their appointees to make decisions and to operate relatively independently. Their focus is on developing well-defined and orderly policymaking processes where problems are resolved within the chain of command and only the most important issues reach the president. Examples of this sort of presidency might include that of Harry Truman or Richard Nixon. The second group are those presidents who tend to rely on informal patterns of consultation, but still focus on the process itself. We might think of these presidents as team builders. They view their advisors as a team who share accountability for decisions, and they tend to seek consensus around specific decisions, drawing on wide but informal patterns of consultation. Examples of this sort of leadership style might include Lyndon Johnson or Jimmy Carter. The third group prefers to rely on formal patterns of authority and hierarchical bureaucracy, but focus on the specifics of individual decisions and issues. They prefer to have broad goals, guide specific policy decisions, but empower those underneath them to deal with the specific issues or questions. Often, key officials will serve as gatekeepers to the president, limiting access from outside the chain of command. We can think of these kinds of presidents as directors or ideologues. Examples of these sorts of presidents might include Woodrow Wilson or Ronald Reagan. And finally, we have presidents who prefer to rely on informal patterns of authority and focus on specific issues or policies, and we tend to call these analysts or innovators. Presidents in this group tolerate conflict among those around them and indeed often view it as an important source of information or insight. Such presidents often seek to know as much as possible about a situation before making a decision. Examples of these kinds of presidencies might include Franklin Roosevelt or Bill Clinton. Now, a number of studies have gone on to further clarify, refine, and expand upon this sort of framework, but this at least gives you a basic sense of what's involved in this kind of analysis. Other efforts to group presidential approaches to foreign policy can draw on their individual orientations rather than on their psychology. Examples of this might include Paul Tost's Twitter thread on the topic, in which he classifies presidencies along 2 axes. The first is the president's general approach to U.S. foreign policy abroad. That is, does a president generally pursue a more cooperative approach, engaging actively with other countries, or do they pursue a more non-cooperative approach, emphasizing unilateralism and self-interest in foreign policy? And the second axis evaluates a president's approach to understanding the role of the United States in the international system. Are they more selective, preferring less global, more isolationist approaches, or are they more assertive internationally and globalist in their orientation? Based on these, Post develops 4 broad presidential orientations with somewhat amusing names. The first are presidents who generally operate in a collective, internationalist, or global manner, often working through multilateral institutions to pursue collective aims. Post labels this group Team America and places Clinton, Ford, Carter, Truman, Franklin Roosevelt, George H.W. Bush in this camp, and suggests that Biden's foreign policy appears to place him in this group as well. The second group are presidents who are more selective in their engagement globally, but who nevertheless cooperate in their orientation, working through multilateral institutions when they decide to operate globally. Post label this group Reluctant America and includes Obama, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Franklin Roosevelt in this group. The third group is generally non-cooperative or more unilateral in their orientation, but nevertheless seek to operate on a global level. Post labels this group America, F yeah, and includes George W. Bush, Johnson, Wilson, and Reagan. And the final group, we have presidents who are more unilateral in their foreign policy orientation and isolationist in their approach. Post labels this group America First and includes Nixon and Trump in this category. Now, there are, of course, lots of other ways we could think about presidential leadership styles, and countless books have already been written on this topic, but that's it for now. I am curious what you think, though. Does political psychology help us to understand foreign policy decision making? What does this approach offer that traditional theories of international relations like liberalism, constructivism, and realism miss out on? Leave a comment below and let me know what you think, and thanks for watching, everyone. Have a good day. Bye.